Let me begin by welcoming all of you to this session on the Grenada Revolution. Please permit me, if you are unable to hear me in the back, I'm dealing with a strep throat, and it's causing me some concern, but I'll manage, will manage. As a sociologist and as a Grenadian, I have always wanted, for the last 5 or 6 years, to have a panel such as this talk about Grenada and talk about the Grenada Revolution. Let me share with you why. Those of us that have done research on Grenada, those of us that have read the manuscripts and the books about Grenada, have realized that outsiders, and I'm using this in a kind way, that outsiders have written about, have spoken about, have informed us about the Grenada Revolution. However, I know of no book or no article in terms of research article that has come from people who have actually participated in that movement. That movement has had a tremendous impact on Grenada. And as I said to you a few minutes ago, I've always wanted to put a panel together to get an inside view of the Grenada Revolution. We have been very fortunate, ladies and gentlemen, to be able to do this. We have with us, to my left, KENDRICK RADIX, former Attorney General, if my memory serves me correctly, a person who has participated on a high level in the Grenada Revolution. And Attorney RADIX is going to share with us some ideas, some thoughts, some challenges, if you will, about the revolution. The person to my left is a person that I have met as of a few minutes ago. I did not know her. We have gotten to know one another via the telephone and via a common friend, a common Grenadian friend, I should say, the person of Decima Williams. This person is not Decima Williams. This person is Ms. Judy Williams. And you might say to me that I need to introduce her and say a whole lot about her in terms of a biographical sketch. I know nothing about her, very little about her. When I spoke with Decima and with Dr. Millette, they said to me that a person that would bring some first-hand kinds of experiences to us is Ms. Judy Williams. Judy, we thank you for taking time off from her busy schedule to be here with us today. And let me say to you, this is a last-minute kind of thing. Last minute meaning yesterday. We called her, and she says, when is the panel? I said, it's going to be tomorrow. I gave you wrong information at the time. I said it would have been 11 o'clock. And she was willing, as of yesterday, to show up here today for 11 a.m. Again, I thank you. To my right is a person that I've come to know over the last few days. It's a person that I have read about. It's a person that I have spoken with over the telephone. It's a person about whose father I have read quite a bit about. Grandfather. That tells you. Again, I'm giving you misinformation, but that's okay. Terry Marisho. Terry, we thank you for taking time off this morning. I was trying to chase him through the hospitals. He's such a busy man that when I call one number, he would leave that number, and I would try to reach him at the other number. And he didn't quite get to that other number as of yet. So I thank you for taking time off from your business schedule, Dr. Marisho, to be with us today. The person to my The other end of the table is Dr. James Millette. I think James need no introduction. He is a Caribbeanist. He is a historian. He is a senior lecturer in the Department of History at St. Augustine and visiting professor of Black Studies in the History Department at Oberlin College in West Virginia. As we say in Grenada, Cousin Millette, I thank you for taking time off from your business schedule to be with us today. In terms of procedure, we are going to begin with Attorney KENDRICK RADIX, followed by Ms. Williams, followed by Dr. Marishaw, and Dr. James Millette is going to serve as the discussant to kind of pull the presentation together. So let me introduce to you and welcome to this panel Attorney KENDRICK RADIX. We thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me say how happy I am to be present here this afternoon and to participate in your deliberations. I think it's very timely that so many of you could come to this conference, particularly to Grenada, when we have enjoyed so much democracy now that we have very little money. So we welcome all the foreign visitors who are going to put a positive spin on the economic performance for the month of May. And in another context, to welcome you to our country as we experience and survive these new machinations of democracy. The democracy which we had hoped to establish and to perpetuate is certainly not the condition in which we live today. And I can truly say that the Grenada Revolution, which to the uninitiated burst upon the scene very suddenly in March of 1979, was not a mere accident of history, but a consequence of a deliberate process of the defeat of every principle of democracy that people held dear. In fact, to the visitors from abroad, you may have come to know Grenada in the early 1970s, or even before, for the real students of this part of the world, in the echoes, perhaps is the kindest word I can put, of the mystic from the West, Sir Dr. Eric Matthew Gary, JP, OP, FRSA, OL, KCMG, ABCD, down to Z. He had all the letters of the alphabet. And in fact, he was a very relevant character in the 1950s, who in fact, give him his due, in fact struck a blow against British colonialism, struck a blow against the plantocrats, the people who had in fact been the descendants of the slave-owning class, and who in fact controlled the economy of this country, the people who, in whose hands the residue of economic activity in the colonial period had in fact passed. And he struck that fatal blow against them at that time. But as he became institutionalized, he departed from that sacred mission and in fact grew into a mystic and nightclub owner, and who, through manifestations and the promotion of superstition and magic, in fact was causing underdevelopment, backwardness, constitutional corruption, and in fact terrorizing the people of this nation. As a young boy in those early days, seeing the wane of colonialism and reaction, one, I suppose, as a product of that environment, was able to associate with some of the future leaders who would grow up and come to hold positions of responsibility, conscious of the sacred trust and duty which people who have opportunities must perform in order to service the people of their countries, and as well as that, to be able to live in conformity with one's convictions. And so the Grenada Revolution was not an accident, but a byproduct of decades of repression. And it was a reaction because our people in Grenada are a people of a proud past. Our people contributed centuries ago in the glorious Haitian Revolution, where fighters from Grenada made an input into the establishment in the region of the first revolution in the Americas, and we are products of that, of those people. We are also products also of another great Grenadian revolutionary, Julius Fedor, who struck a blow for freedom, and who for 4.5 years, in 1795, we had the abrogation of slavery and the full establishment in Grenada of people's power, people's politics, people armed to promote and to defend their interests. And so we are descendants of these people. We are also descendants of Gary, who I said struck the blow against colonialism, etc., as well as the descendants of another great Grenadian who fought not only at home but in Trinidad and Tobago, a man by the name of Tabul Uriah Buzz Butler, who in fact brought the power of the trade union movement to Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, Grenadians, like all people around the world, particularly people who have been the victims of repression, the victims of death, victims of underdevelopment, victims of racism, they like freedom. And after 28 years of Gary, this blow struck by the Grenada Revolution was announced to the world by Maurice Bishop on the 13th of March, 1979. Not being a bolt out of the blue, there was a preparatory period for the nurturing, the crystallization and the maturity of ideas, and indeed the legitimizing or legitimation of the vehicle which was to take us through this period. And so there was an organization called the New Jewel Movement, which movement consisted of both what we can call intelligentsia, unemployed, youth, democratic forces, who got together and in fact from 1970 to put together an organization which would promote national salvation and liberation. And for those of you who perhaps might not know it, JEWEL was a joint effort for the education, welfare, and liberation, and we had an agenda. And the agenda was to be found in a manifesto which was published in 1973, which called definitely for us to put an end to superstition and magic. And instead of the government promoting the idea of unidentified flying objects, which was the centerpiece of Garyism, UFOs, UFOlogy, secret life of plants, life beyond the stars, and to concentrate on the questions of underdevelopment, of poverty, of illiteracy, lack of health, the lack, in fact, in these countries, and putting at the door of British imperialism the indictment for the poverty and hardship of these islands, to move away from this escapism and deal with living reality. Now, as a consequence of this challenge, we deliberately set about to educate the people by establishing a newspaper which would expose the corruption and the contradictions within the system. And the newspaper was the most successful newspaper ever in the history of Grenada. We, in fact, used to publish underground because they proscribed the newspaper. Gary proscribed the newspaper, though there was a constitution which provided for a free press. But they proscribed the newspaper by saying that one had to pay the government money to publish the newspaper, etc. And in so doing, we overcame that problem in many respects by changing the name of the newspaper every week so that it did not conform in law to a newspaper. Nonetheless, many of our people were beaten and terrorized. I myself was nearly beaten to the point of death at that time for being involved in that activity. And the newspaper, an essential tool. Also, many battles were fought for workers' rights, to establish the right to form and to join trade unions, because Gary ran this country like his own fiefdom, with his trade union being the only de facto and de jure trade union in the country. Everybody had to belong to his union, and so he was President General for life, and no other trade union could be registered and operate in the country. So that then there was another famous incident, which is the last one I will give by way of an example. We also decided that we would mobilize the country, mass mobilization, in order to democratically defeat Gary by promoting a general strike to register the discontent, because in the parliament, in the British-style constitution, which they had for many, many years, Gary, by manipulating the electoral system, was able to defeat all the other opposition forces. I think that they were 15-1 or whatever it was, and it was like a voice in the wilderness and so on. So we decided on mass mobilization. We went to every place in this country. We analyzed the number of villages, I forget how many, and we made sure that we went there mobilizing the country by mass mobilization and so on. And then by 1973, we were ready, and so mobilized the whole country We were promoting a general strike, which is within the democratic framework, might I say, that you have a right to oppose the government. And that in calling this general strike, they attacked us, beat us, brought false charges against us, and Maurice Bishop, our then leader, together with others, were nearly beaten to death, imprisoned, etc. The majority of our people were not prepared for this violent and extra-legal and unconstitutional attack, and so closed down this country for 3 months. 3 months, during which time, in fact, Maurice Bishop's father was executed in one of these demonstrations by one of Gary's agents, who today is still never been prosecuted. And so it set the picture for the Grenada Revolution, which was to take place in 1979. So that the popular uprising, which took place in Grenada in 1973, in which country was closed down for 3.5 months, Gary won in the end because he used extra-legal means to shoot up and to terrorize the population. And so that by 1979, harder positions had to be taken. And so in 1979, when Gary was constantly losing the political battle because we were represented in the parliament, outperforming him, and in fact, by exposing the corruption and the alternative economic policies which we had in our manifesto, we had gained the political ascendancy in Grenada. The Grenada Revolution then came in train. Now, Maurice Bishop, in announcing the Grenada Revolution, said that it was a revolution for food and for work. I just happen to have with me today the Maurice Bishop speeches. And I just would like to say that Maurice Bishop, in calling on the people, I am now calling upon the working people, the youth, the farmers, the fishermen, the middle-class people, and the women to join our armed revolutionary forces at central positions in your communities and to give them any assistance they may need. People of Grenada, this revolution is a revolution for work, a revolution for food, a revolution for decent houses, for health services, and for a bright future for the children, our children and great-grandchildren. Then it was a very simple message. It was a message that our revolution, though it was taking place within a global context of the ascendancy of the United States in the region, and I didn't do that analysis, but I understand today I'm dealing with scholars and intellectuals and all these very Ivy League people. So I'm sure that they would have these perceptions and histories better than I would recall. But you will no doubt recall the world that we were living in 1979. It was, in fact, the period of, quote-unquote, the Cold War. Although down here it's quite warm, it's always warm. You know? And when we had the superpowers, and then there was the question of the Monroe Doctrine, and then there was the question again of new theories being propounded from the Pentagon and the State Department and the think tanks. It was frightening down here, you know. Frightening. And then there were these new theories being propounded of the third border of the United States. And with all of that, And I want to tell you something today, confide in you today, that with all of those things happening, and knowing they were happening, I want to tell you, and being conscious that we were a small and poor country, I want to tell you today that aware of all of those difficulties, we were prepared to look them in the eye and to stand up and be counted for our convictions. Now, some people might call it foolhardy, but there comes a time in the affairs of nations and peoples where, even though one is aware of the difficulties, by the experience of history, history will dictate what one does. It may be necessary to make sacrifices and to be defeated. Nevertheless, we must still be prepared to struggle. And I think that this is to be seen very early on in the life of the Grenada Revolution, when Morris Bishop, in one of his early speeches, says, "We are no one's lackey." He said that it is well established internationally that all independent countries have a right to full, free, and unhampered right to conduct their own internal affairs. We do not, therefore, recognize the right of the United States of America to instruct us on who may help develop, or whom we may develop relations with, or who we may not. From the day one of the revolution, we have always striven to have and to develop the closest and friendliest relations with the United States, as well as Canada, etc. We have demonstrated beyond doubt that we are prepared to die to win our freedom. We are even more prepared to die to maintain that freedom now that we have tasted it. Now, the fact of the matter is that, consistent with the United Nations Charter, consistent with the Organization of American States to which we belong, consistent with the membership of the Commonwealth to which we belong, all sovereign, and consistent with international law, all sovereign nations have a right to maintain their sovereignty. Non-interference in internal affairs, the right to send ambassadors to countries which they wish to do so, the right to receive, etc., etc., and in keeping with their sovereignty and so on. Now, in fact, we have a local saying that your friend is my friend is one local saying, but also we also have a local saying that not because you might be vexed with your friend that I must get vexed with your friend if it's my friend. Your friend is your friend and my friend is my friend, but you don't have a right to tell us what to do. Now, very early in the game, we decided that we would develop relations with the United States, with Cuba, and that in keeping with our sovereignty, we took that decision. Now, in Grenada, we have no problem with Cuba. Cuba, for us, was always part of the Caribbean. In fact, in many instances, many of our relations had gone to Cuba in the very terrible time, cutting cane for a few pesos and to send back to hungry Grenada. And that was not a problem. But because the United States and Cuba had a problem, that's their problem, that's not our problem. And therefore we had to tell them, the United States of America, that if it is our desire to do so, then we will do that. Now, Morris Bishop put it quite nicely when he said that we are, in fact, not in anybody's backyard. You remember the backyard? The backyard is the obverse side of the same hand as the Monroe Doctrine. The backyard, United States backyard. And having gone there to the United States of America myself as the ambassador of Grenada in the revolutionary period, I used to be summoned to the State Department quite often. And they used to get a tall guy, I don't know, very taller man, 6 foot, 6'8". And they would have him come in to talk to me. And he would say, we notice you are doing so and so, but I wouldn't do that if I were you. So I had to tell him that, after all, we are not Louisiana or Tennessee. And that we were a sovereign country. It is not that we, and let me make it clear, we are not anti-American. We are not anti-American, and far from this proposition that there was the third border of the United States in the Caribbean. That defied all the geography I had learned as a boy, because I know they had a border up with Mexico and one with Canada. I didn't recognize there was a border down in the Caribbean. So that Maurice Bishop had to say that we are in nobody's backyard. So the Grenada Revolution came on the scene then with a number of specific objectives. It is the first objective really was an objective to develop Grenada internally and to develop it deliberately in certain areas, namely in the area of the economy, agriculture, agro-industrial development, fisheries and tourism, as a consequence whereof, and deliberately so, the international airport with Cuban and other international help was built. And that it was no dream or accident, it was a deliberate decision. Also, agro-industrial development, we have been producing primary agricultural products for centuries, sending them away, and re-importing them in some instances at exaggerated prices, and so it was decided we would get into the business. Nothing wrong with that either, I suppose. Tourism, of course, you see the abundant beauty of our country, and so we like to share it for some dollars, and so again, tourism, it seemed a sensible thing to do. Fisheries also, we have a zone, economic zone, that may be about 10 times the size of the national territory. It seems as though it's a good business to get into, and so those were deliberate areas of development. For our people also, the social agenda, it meant too that we had to eradicate for all time. We had to immunize, which might be a better term, the youth for the future. To immunize them against superstition and magic. To introduce deliberately education from the very earliest period right up to the universities. And so deliberately again, opportunities were sought around the world for our students to be able to go through to university level, and happily today, primarily again with the assistance of Cuba, we have Dr. Mary Shaw, one of those early products of the revolution, together with many of them are now back and are responsible for the health system in Grenada today. Just in 4.5 years, we have so many doctors, you will never believe it. You'll never believe it. All right, so that all these things were deliberate. In terms also of the domestic agenda, there was the question of the inherited Westminster system. As you know, those of you who know your European history well, And we in these colonial parts, in order to get our certifications and so, we, you know, in order to be accepted as one of their products, you had to understand the system. And those of you who know of the king and all of those things, and the devolution into the parliamentary system of government, know that the British people have been going through a process of evolution to this system by virtue of all the wars they fought in, the Wars of the Roses, the Great World War, all of these things before people were able, the ordinary people in the street, to wield some political power. Now, when the British Parliament, when the British power was in decline, and that these colonies in these parts and in Africa were becoming an imperial burden, they superimposed on the underdevelopment this Westminster system of the honorable this and the honorable that, and the speaker with a wig, 17th century wig on the head. You know, when it's hot as hell, I mean, the truth of the matter. And we've been in the parliament too, so we participate in all that, so we know what we experience the whole thing. And therefore, it is a transplantation. There is nothing at all that is relevant to our historical experience of Africa and so on, where we have the rubbing shoulders with people, participating, getting ideas, because we like to talk. You bring people together, they like to talk. And my own concrete experiences during the life of the revolution, it was that the people were the greatest repository of ideas. And the people, in fact, shot up ideas which were applicable solutions to their problems, many of their problems. And so this Westminster system, which Gary abused and other politicians abused, was supplanted by popular institutions of democracy. In fact, the revolution was constantly attacked of having no constitution, especially by certain Reaganite political people. And we had to remind them that when they had their own revolution, it took 13.5 years to get a constitution. And let me salute some of our own people, because I think that some of our intellectuals were even, those in Washington were no match for some of our homegrown intellectuals. So that we had the answers for them. And in fact, we were able to appreciate that what we were trying to introduce was a process which would sooner or later bear some fruit. So that the Grenada Revolution internally and its democratization, social experimentation, its conscious activity sought to translate also that into a regional and international thrust. And perhaps we can say that we made some small effort, in fact, in achieving an international idea for small countries that Comrade Bishop, in fact, and he personally, let me put in that, personally developed the notion of small island developing states in the international community. He was the pioneer of that idea. And that idea has been developed and taken further and amplified for the benefit of small island developing countries in the Pacific, all over the world, that this idea is being utilized. It is also another idea that, in fact, within the United Nations system, we made contributions to disarmament and, in fact, to seeking to establish the right of small countries to develop and to have their associations, etc., as they will, free from pressure, free from diktat, free from threats, and so on. Let us take, our little airport you came in on there. You didn't see any underground bunkers. You didn't see any rocket silos, and so on. But you remember that Reagan went on television with this spy satellite picture showing this big airport that we are building. Now, had he the sense to buy a Kodak Instamatic, he could have gone and saved millions of dollars from the technology. But in fact, life is a valid experience, and that millions of people today know that Reagan was no, let me be as kind as I can, Reagan was in fact no Lincoln. As kind as I could. And that in fact the American people are feeling today the consequences of the decisions that had been taken then. So that I think I think that other people could develop certain other ideas. But I want to say something before I close, because the Grenada Revolution, and might I quote Fidel Castro, it was a big revolution in a small country, Fidel said. And it was certainly that. We have, in fact, a number of achievements to our command that have survived. A number of achievements. For me personally, the greatest achievement of our revolution was, in fact, the unity of our people. I have never seen in my life our people so united as they had been during the period of the revolution. That in fact, self-interest was totally subordinated to the national and community interests of the country, and that sacrifices of enormous proportions were made by people for and on behalf of the general good. Enormous achievement, and it is something to be savored and so on. I think internationally, we participated in the non-aligned movement. As equals, we participated within the Caribbean. And in fact, it was Morris Bishop who quoted an expression, one Caribbean, one people, and one future. We feel, certainly, that today, with the collapse of the ideological struggle, that in fact we have to see whether or not the focus which was on the region in terms of the propounding of ideas, of its importance, of the promotion of democracy, of the promotion of development, whether or not these values are still applicable. Now, we don't hear too much now. We hear now about a proposal for the joining of Canada, Mexico, and Canada, United States, etc. But we don't hear too much about dollars for the Caribbean region anymore. What is it again? CBI, and aid flows. The Caribbean is no longer important because I suppose Western and Eastern and Central Europe will be the thrust, and that the Caribbean will lose its focus because the possibilities which this region has by way of descent, and which potentially could in fact mirror the discontent within the United States. And it's my belief that, in fact, that is why the Grenada Revolution was a threat. It wasn't a military threat. When the United States spoke about a threat, the threat it was the example that it posed for the people who were able to speak the language, who in 3 hours' time could be down here by a jet plane, and who could see the sons and daughters of former slaves in real power, not in Rodney King type power, but in real power, demonstrating how to overcome problems. That is what we have to look for. And therefore now, we have to see whether or not in this new globalization in the Caribbean, whether or not these issues will hold center stage. I take a pessimistic view that in fact these foreign solutions, I heard this morning, I attended something and got 5 minutes of intellectual stimulation, that in fact that these models which are being put up, that this Caribbean here, many people, especially big and powerful developed countries, usually see it as a transplantation, an area in which these foreign models are always imposed, never giving local experimentation an opportunity to develop. And I was reminded the way the United States invaded Grenada to extinguish every last seed, every last atom of initiative and experimentation that had, when the United States shuttle blew up, killing all the astronauts and the technology, had they not been allowed to experiment again, they would not have been able to go up in space and would have been forever planted to the ground. Some might say it's not a bad solution, but at least they're able to experiment. So too it is the right of people to be able to engage in political, social, and other levels of experimentation, and that they should not be stymied and repressed into this transplant for which I was uprooted myself from Africa into a foreign land. So perhaps, therefore, without going on any further, this meeting of all these intellectuals, I feel the power of your concerns coming on to me. Perhaps we, in terms of our future in this region and with ourselves, could invite your assistance in perhaps preserving a very important aspect of our most recent history. Because I want to tell you that the United States of America, when they invaded here, just like ancient Rome, when they sacked Carthage and Gaul and so on, just like conquerors of the past, they took our most precious possessions, that is, all our documents, all our documents back to Washington. I understand they're in the National Archives over there. So perhaps Brother Bishop, Prime Minister Bishop, was in fact the greatest repository of all our documentation. He had about 2,000 or 3,000 of his own books, as well as all the other records. Perhaps this meeting can appropriately pass some resolution recognizing that intellectual property perhaps is the most fundamental right that people have, that we could call upon you as individuals and an organization to restore to the people of Grenada the inalienable right to knowledge of their own culture and of their own historical experience. I could talk to you about the Grenada Revolution for a long time, but one must not seek to dominate. And perhaps others will say it, but it is a great tragedy that our revolution was defeated not by an enemy from without, but from within. That our revolution and our leaders, who unselfishly struggled for years of undeniable hardship, sacrifice, giving both life and limb, that in fact not from those who did that did counter-revolution arise, but from high theoreticians, from people who claim to be the embodiment of all sorts of vision, that in fact that rose up inside the party demagoguery. Demagoguery, apart from genuine revolutionary democracy, grew up inside the party, and in fact they defeated this idea. I like to say Maurice Bishop, whom I knew as a boy because we grew up as boys together, was a leader who was without malice. That was both his strength and his weakness, because he cared nothing about himself. He didn't value himself. He wasn't egocentric at all. He was simple, without rancor. Never consciously promoting the idea of being a maximum leader, but democratic even to a fault. That even by engineering plurality, which the other psychologists and all the other analysts in checking his character knew, that in fact they rose up and killed him. Now I like it to be said that I personally, I am not any high theoretician. I was very poorly qualified Marxist, because those of you who read the American book from the notes would see that they scored me 0. My enemies scored me at 0 in that debacle. But I think history will record that I was the one who said that what is happening now is that there is a cleavage developing, and that in fact you all will kill the Grenada Revolution and to kill the leader of the revolution, which in fact actually happened 1 year later. So that I don't claim to be any mystic myself, but objectively it was true. And therefore, that experience is a valid experience. It will ensure, just as in the United States and other developed countries who have had their civil wars that killed thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, that institutions will develop so that these social disasters do not arise again. Maurice Bishop and his murder will always be that beacon and foundation to ensure that never again will these types of people rise up to defeat the people and their cause. And so, therefore, then, Maurice Bishop, a martyr, and the martyrs who died with him, we will always remember the contribution of our friends to the Grenada Revolution. And in fact, it is a testimony to the human spirit of a proud but poor people aspiring to legitimate freedom. Thank you very much.